Okay, welcome everybody. We've got top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I know that there will be other people who are joining as I go through this introduction, and that's just fine. Again, thank you for taking time out today to attend. My name is Anthony Adorno. I'm with DeGarmo, and I'm joined today by Demetria Walls and Heidi Polera, who will be our expert speakers, presenting their case studies to you in just a few minutes. For those of you who weren't able to attend in January, and this is your first event, kind of the concept here is, we want to put together a group of folks who are able to share their experiences and learn from one another about how to do their jobs a little bit better, how to think about them differently, be creative, come up with new ways of thinking, ultimately, to the benefit of organ donation and ultimately saving lives. So peer-to-peer discussion group across OPOs, strategies, tips, best practices, and so they occur every other month. At the end of this session, at some point you'll be receiving a survey. That survey is going to ask you about how we did today. It just takes a few minutes, but one of the most important things that we ask is what topics you want to talk about in the future. And when we did our January session, by an overwhelming majority, this topic was the most requested. So overcoming FPA declines. And so we're happy to be able to facilitate this session and hopefully provide you with some different ways of thinking about that process, and and maybe just kind of rethink your strategy or your approach from an interpersonal perspective about how to manage those conversations. So I'd like to begin by introducing our speakers. I'm going to start with Heidi, and so Heidi's with Infinite Legacy. She's been a family service coordinator there for almost 15 years. Prior to becoming an FSC, she worked for 3 years as a hospice liaison. Working for hospice allowed her to become more comfortable speaking to patients and their families about end-of-life decisions and wishes. She learned about the OPO community at an end-of-life conference and was intrigued to learn more. In her previous work life, Heidi was an occupational therapist and also has years of marketing and management experience. She has incorporated skills and experiences from these roles into her current position, and she enjoys helping families through the donation process and finds this work very meaningful. Also welcome Demetria Walls from Mississippi Organ Recovery Agency. Inspired by the impact of donation, Demetria started her journey as a family care specialist 10 years ago. As a licensed social worker, she proudly supports the mission of Mora and truly believes one of her main purposes in life is to serve her community. When not advocating for donor families and recipients, she collaborates with internal departments such as hospital development and community outreach, both charged with the mission to increase donation awareness. She has an unyielding passion for continuing family support after donation and serves diligently on various committees and projects that target ways to keep families engaged and well supported. So thank you both for being our speakers today. We're looking forward to hearing from both of you during our session. For those of you who may not be familiar with this forum, we will have an opportunity for you all to engage with our speakers at the end, to ask questions of them. And you can do so, I would request, using the Q&A area of the Teams interface. You don't have to wait until the end. If something comes up when Heidi or Demetria are sharing their case studies and you want to ask a question, feel free to put it in there. My trusty team, who's normally on these calls, one of them's on spring break. Good for her. The other one is sick. So I'm going to be managing the facilitation and moderation of the session, as well as kind of managing the Q&A at the end. So again, just put any questions that you have in the dialogue box, the Q&A box, and then when we get to that part of the webinar, we'll do our best to get to all the questions as we can. So I'm going to start. I'm sharing my screen. Hopefully everybody can see it. Again, our topic today is interpersonal approaches to overcoming FPA declines. And I wanted to spend just a few minutes kind of talking about kind of philosophically, why we're here. Everybody's here to learn about these interpersonal approaches, the interpersonal dynamics. And when we were prepping for this call, there were several themes that emerged when I was talking with Demetria and Heidi, and just in general, when we talk with other folks in the OPO space. And we wanted to take some time to just kind of consolidate those conversations and give you some awareness of what you're likely to hear, what you're likely to hear come out of these case studies from an interpersonal perspective. And so the first thing is understanding and separating what we're going to call positions from interests. And quite plainly, the position here that we're dealing with is a family declining an FPA donation. So these tend to be relatively fixed. They don't want to authorize donation. That's their position. The position of the donor advocate, of the FSC, of the actual donor is they want donation. So those positions are relatively stable, and unfortunately, sometimes, again, just based on conversations we've had with FSCs and different OPOs, that tends to be where the conversation ends. When the family declines donation, sometimes whether it's organizational policy or whether it's that FSC getting pushed outside of their comfort zone to have a more challenging conversation, in this case, usually that's where the process ends. Of course, that's not why you're here. You're here specifically to learn about how to deal with these situations more effectively from an interpersonal perspective. And so to get there, we need to focus on interests. What are the needs, the motivations of our stakeholders that sets their position? Why is the family declining, given that an FPA is in place? And so, as we talk about this, again, these aren't things that you don't already know. These are just reminders that you're going to hear throughout these case studies. And that is that the position that you're in is dealing with the donor family primarily and having to manage that decline. But there are multiple stakeholders who are part of this process, and that includes obviously the donor and their recipients. And so, as you'll see, having independence and balance in the advocacy for donation is really important, especially when it comes to understanding the underlying interests. And so those interests that you may need to contend with first, of course, are managing the family conversation. So what is it? What are the motivations, the needs, the interests that are underlying or solidifying that position that they have that they don't want to authorize donation? These are all things that you've had to deal with in the past. There's nothing new here. But part of that process also involves invoking the interests of the other stakeholders. And so while it may be important at first to deal with effectively manage the positions of the donor family, finding ways to invoke the interests of the donors, whether it be to save lives or for gratitude or some other connection with the cause or whatever it might be with the potential recipients as well. It's important to find ways to invoke these as part of the conversation. And again, there's a lot of you on the call who know this already, and this is just naturally part of what you do on a day-to-day basis. But there are others on the call where this is just more challenging from an interpersonal perspective. How do we go about doing that? What are the skills that are required in order to manage that conversation and those interpersonal dynamics a little bit more effectively? And that's what we're hoping, and we know that Demetria and Heidi will be able to share with you soon. What we do know is that in order to get beyond the FPA decline, we have to get beyond positions. We have to get beyond the decline, and we need to focus on the interests of the stakeholders involved. And in one of our prep calls, Demetria said something that both Heidi and I found, kind of fascinating, and it's relatively simple but very powerful, and that is, you need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And these conversations are not comfortable conversations. And so when we have a family that is resistant to authorization, and you're trying to invoke other stakeholders' interests, that may put you in a very uncomfortable position interpersonally. And so in order to get through that process, I think what you're going to hear from our conversation today is some of these interpersonal themes emerging. And so just pay attention to how both Heidi and Demetria talk about balance, being aware not only of the family's interests, but also those of the donors and the recipients, and how they leverage influence in different ways as part of those conversations to present compelling arguments, to try to change that position of the donor family. Especially as you'll hear, and as I know a lot of you experience, the importance of stress tolerance, especially in some of these longer cases where the decision isn't made immediately, and there's a lot of adaptability that that is required to kind of manage that that case. And I think the last thing that you'll see as a theme kind of emerging out of their presentations is this notion of respectful persistence, and not just taking no for an answer. So again, interpersonally, I think these are some of the things that you're going to hear from our speakers today. And then again, we'll have an opportunity for you all to ask some questions at the end. So please use the Q&A dialog box at any time during their case study presentations, if you would like to. So I'm going to move on, and we're going to turn it over to Heidi first, but I just want to let everybody know that the case studies that they're going to share, and as I'm sure you all know, if you were asked to share a case study, they're pretty detailed. And so because they want to get all the details right and tell the story in the best way that they can, they may be reading from their notes. So just expect that to occur. And so I'm going to turn it over to Heidi. She's going to open. So Heidi, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thanks, Anthony. Hi, everybody. Glad to be here today. I'm going to start off just with really a little list of some of the current reasons for the opposition. When we were preparing, Demetria, Anthony, and I talked, and you guys are probably all aware of this, and maybe there'll even be an opportunity to add some more ones in during the conversation. But we just kind of went through a list of, these are the main reasons that we get this opposition. One of them is the family basically states they're done. They're exhausted. They've been doing this for days, and they really just can't take any more physical or emotional exhaustion in the ICU. There's a lot of reasons that come down to the family has no control over anything that has been happening to them. We see that in a lot of, that gets manifested in a lot of different ways. But essentially, however long their loved one's hospitalization has been, they have had all these things happen in the ICU to their loved one, and they have not been able to do a thing for them. And so everything that has happened, everything that has been said to them is just coming at them, and they have zero control. Many people have stated they know that their loved one's designated, but they also know they don't want to be maintained on machines. So it becomes a balancing of, how do we honor both of their wishes, for them not to be on machines, but also to be a donor. Many families and next of kins believe that the patient's designation may have affected their loved one's hospital course or treatment. And many people are shocked that their loved one never told them that they were designated. And it's this disbelief. How did I not know this? We talked about everything, and their loved one never mentioned to them that they made the decision to donate. And some of them, I think, just don't believe that that could actually be true. And then there's also language barriers to all of this. A lot of people saying their loved one, they really truly did not understand what was happening at the MVA whenever they went and made the decision to donate. So that's kind of our short list. There's lots of other reasons, I'm sure, but these were kind of the main ones that we talked about. So we just wanted to open up with that first before I start my case study. So I will go into my case study. I was at one of our local hospitals for a 48-year-old female. She was found down at home by family members post CPA with an unknown downtime. Her core family consisted of 3 daughters and her boyfriend. The patient underwent hypothermia protocol, and during one of our clinical updates, the nurse stated that after explaining hypothermia protocol to the family, a family member in the room commented that's something that they do so organs can be harvested. The RN assured the family that hypothermia protocol was standard with patient care with a CPA and reiterated the goals of caring for the patient. After partial rewarming, the patient went to Nuke Med for flow study early in the morning on the second day of her admission. Results showed inadequate uptake of the tracer, and the patient was too unstable for an apnea. So the plan was made to repeat the CBF again, a minimum of 6 hours later. Later in the morning, a clinical exam was done. It was consistent with brain death, and the patient went to CBF a second time. The report came back and it showed flow in the middle and anterior cerebral arteries. So the family was updated by the physician about these results and continued to emphasize her devastating neurologic injury without potential for meaningful recovery, but did let them know that she did have flow in some of her arteries and that she was not officially brain dead. The plan was made to give the patient another 24 to 48 hours. So the family continued to be fully life-saving, and one family member expressed belief that the patient would fully recover. On the evening of the third day of admission, we received an update that the family was discussing withdrawal and that they may be moving in that direction regardless of the CBF tests and the results. The following day, during our AM check-in call, we were updated that the patient would be going to CBF later in the morning and that family was on site, and there had been no further talk of withdrawal at that point. So I headed on site. Upon arrival, I was updated that the physician completed his own clinical exam, which is now the third one during the patient's admission, which was consistent with brain death. This was followed by CBF mid-afternoon, which was also consistent with brain death. So then I huddled, we all did, with the doc leading the meeting. He was amenable for this writer to be in the meeting and agreeable to use appropriate transition language. There was a large family presence in the meeting. The daughters were present as well as the patient's boyfriend, and they were all working together well. The physician did transition appropriately to me. I supported the family and provided them space to talk and storytell and answer their questions. I always, even if the family doesn't have any questions, kind of do a brief overview of brain injuries and the brain death testing and let them know without somebody's brain functioning that it's not able for them to suffer or be aware, afraid, or alert of what's happening. I then transitioned to next steps. Talked about funeral home planning and the role of the medical examiner, and then when appropriate, discussed the patient's designation and the tremendous need for organ donation. The daughters immediately had a negative reaction, stating that she was uneducated and felt she didn't understand what she was signing up for at the MVA. They also said, and she's sick, she didn't take very good care of herself, and she probably doesn't have any organs that were good anyway. Other family members started providing negative input regarding donation as well. Everybody kind of came at me at once. There were many discussions and side conversations that ensued, including that the patient stated she never wanted to be cut on. Family questioned the legality of her first person designation and that daughters should not have to be put under any more stress, as they had finally accepted after 4 days that the patient would be dead today and they would move forward with withdrawal. I affirmed their feelings and engaged in a lengthy conversation regarding the patient's longstanding designation. She'd been designated since 2009. Respect of patient's body throughout the process, and explained in layman's terms, the UAGA falling under the personal property area of law. And I often will say, it's the same as if a patient said they wanted their favorite ring to go to their sister. And it's like saying they want their organs to help other people if they die. And our obligation to honor the patient's wishes. I circled back. I remember circling back to their original objection, and I normalized that most people never talk about death and dying or donating their organs, and that many families that we talk to have no idea what their loved one wanted. But encourage them to think that it could be possible that their mom perhaps worked with someone or knew someone who had a transplant, or knew somebody that had a family member that was a donor, or maybe she had seen a story in the news or a documentary that could have inspired her to donate her organs. So as this discussion ensued, one of the daughters eventually left the room, as well as several other family members, but family continued in and out of the room with additional thoughts and feelings being added into the conversation. And of course, I'm reading this and it's going along pretty quickly, but these conversations are drawn out. I continued engaging and supported and affirmed all their statements while continuing to support the patient's wish to donate. Ultimately, the daughter's boyfriend asked if there was anything this writer could do to not have donation occur. And so even though I knew that we would move forward, in order to build rapport and trust with the family, I offered to call our administrator on call. But I did firmly state to the family that it was unlikely that we would not move forward with donation. I basically said, I've done this before, and she will probably tell me that we're obligated to move forward. One family member who left the room returned, stating that he had been in contact with his lawyer and was expecting a return call back from that person. One family member stated that they had been involved a couple years ago with a niece that was a donor, and she knows that blood will be drawn and skin and hair samples will be taken, and she didn't want the daughters to go through that. I continued to address and affirm everyone's statements, but concentrated on the daughters since they were ultimately our legal next of kin. The meeting ended with a plan for everyone to take a break, step outside for fresh air, and to reconvene in about a half an hour while I reached out to our administrator on call. In the meantime, the chaplain who had been supporting the family offered bedside ritual and her services to the family. The family requested EKG strips as they wanted to get matching tattoos. So I'll just add, because as with most of our cases, our conversation does not happen in a vacuum. So I just wanted to add in, while this kind of intense conversation was going on, there was other bits and pieces that I learned. There was extra stress for the family due to the patient's ex-husband trying to visit the patient at the hospital, but the patient had multiple restraining orders against him. One family member was an active drug user and was with the patient during her injury, and that was a point of tension for the family. The patient's tox screen was negative, but she was on methadone and had a history of drug use. And then, as it would be, there was major construction on the ICU. There were jackhammers that were being used, plastic sheeting that was hanging in some areas of the unit, and the noise level was very loud at times. The construction crew took breaks, like planned breaks, just for the team, and it must have been something really serious because you don't usually see that. But they were taking breaks, but we had to talk loud and practically shout at each other during times of this conversation. And so this environment just added to the stress of the whole situation. During our break, family members went to the medical team and stated that they were not wanting donation to move forward and pleaded for it not to happen. I did reach out to our AOC as planned and updated them on the situation, that I had extended this conversation to the family, but had already prepped them that I would come back saying that donation would be moving forward. So I returned to the family in about a half an hour and stated that, as I had expected, that we would move forward with donation due to our obligation to do so. I affirmed that this was not the answer that they wanted, but that their mom was in a position to help others and make something good come out of this situation. And my hope is this will bring them some comfort and peace. Daughters wanted to head outside for fresh air, so they made plans to meet up with them on their return. Upon returning, the daughters did state that they had all talked and were now more accepting of their mom's wish and apologized to this writer for being difficult. I emphasize that no apology is needed and that I recognize that we talk to families at very difficult times. I thank them profusely for changing their perspective and honoring their mom's wish, and began a more detailed conversation about the process and paperwork. I completed paperwork and stayed with the family until they decided to go home for the evening. While doing paperwork, I discovered that the family was also very upset that the family member who was with her didn't call the ambulance soon enough, or they didn't think soon enough, and that the patient's jewelry was missing. They firmly wanted an OR to happen as soon as possible because they really just wanted everything to be done, and made a plan to advocate for them to the best of my ability. By late evening, it was determined that we could go to the OR the next day. I made a plan to be with them during final goodbyes the next day. I was not on call, but decided to stick it out with this family for continuity. I arrived on site the next day. Family, when I came in from the parking lot, they were actually outside of the hospital, so I spent some time supporting them and providing updates about allocation. I participated in final goodbyes with the family and then walked to them to the front doors of the hospital as they made their way home. I made a plan to call daughters post-OR with outcomes. As luck would have it, no organs were transplanted, which is really what I needed at that point, but the liver did go to research. When I updated Daughters Are the Same, they said to me, "We told you her organs weren't any good," to which I affirmed and let them know that the decision to donate far outweighs the outcomes, and that we were honored to honor their mom's decision, and that she gave us the opportunity to try to help others.
Thank you, Heidi. And I found that, as part of our prep calls, to be a really interesting way of thinking about it as well, that the decision to donate far outweighs the outcomes. And hopefully they were able to see that at the end. And, we'll talk a little bit more about themes that emerged from both of these case studies after Demetrius, but it's clear that in your situation in particular, managing a great deal of stress, but in particular, your ability to balance advocacy, not only for the family and going back to the AOC and expressing their concerns, but also to invoke the interests of the donor as well, and to do that effectively so that the family ultimately changed their position. So thank you. Demetria?
Yes.
Turn it over.
Thank you. Thank you. The case study that I picked is a combination of, I'm sure, our favorite DCD approaches and FPA opposition. I picked this case because it had a lot of layers and a lot of challenges that we see often. For the sake of storytelling, I'm going to refer to the patient as Corey, just because I'm terrible at retelling stories. Corey was a 36-year-old male. He was admitted status post self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Shortly after receiving the referrals, I was able to huddle with the providers to get additional information and to develop a plan. With a GCS of 3, an overbreathing event, he was stated to be very unstable and herniating. He was not suspected to survive the night, and they said if he did, he would definitely progress to brain death. The brother, John, was the designated decision maker, and the parents were en route to say their goodbyes before withdrawing the event. Recognizing the family rating triggers and of them wanting to withdraw care, I started support immediately. During this time, John shared his understanding of Corey's prognosis and confirmed that his parents were en route. They was expected to arrive within the next 2 to 3 hours. The plan was to say their goodbyes, and his words, pull the plug. I'm sure we hear that all the time. He also shared that 4 years ago, Corey experienced a work injury that left him suffering with a chronic back pain. Medication no longer worked, and because he did not have insurance or money, doctors refused extensive treatment. Without prompting, he shared details of the incident. Corey left the house earlier than usual that morning and drove his truck to his mom's house. Later that day, she heard gunshots and ran to the door. There, she found Corey sitting in the truck with a gun in his hand. As she tried to stop the bleeding, she called 911 and then called John, who lived just a few minutes away. AMR and local authorities arrived, but refused to provide care until the gun was secured. When John arrived, he immediately removed the gun and then was asked to help his brother out of the truck and onto the stretcher. When asked to share stories about Corey, they described him as the good brother, the funny and kind one that would give you the shirt off his back. He was more like a dad to his nephews and nieces, especially a 3-week-old great nephew that carried his name. It was at this time that I started to share how their description of Corey aligned with the very special decision that he made. John stopped me in mid-sentence to say that he knew exactly what his brother did and what I was about to say. He shared that Corey was a registered donor. He went on to share that it was him that encouraged Corey to register after his best friend's mother received a kidney transplant. As we continue to talk, they all agreed that Corey was the type of person that would help anyone, and they all wanted to honor his decision. And I'm sure you all know, probably heard my sigh of relief across the state. That doesn't always happen like that. I shared both pathways to donation and the need to continue stabilizing Corey for additional assessments. Several hours passed and the parents arrived. We had a very similar discussion and they were all on board. They were not aware of his FPA, but they were in favor of donation and wanted to honor his decision. Throughout the night, the family struggled with the decision to withdraw support that night or wait for him to progress to brain death, as they wanted to help as many people as possible, especially someone in need of a heart transplant. Acknowledging their concerns, I suggested that we pause the discussion to give them time to visit and talk more with the medical team before we develop a final plan. In the meantime of waiting, I huddled with the PM providers and nursing staff to discuss management needs and I plan to revisit the conversation. While at the bedside, the PM nurse, shift change, new nurse came in, and he shared updates. He shared that Corey would likely remain stable throughout the night and suggested that they wait until morning before making any rushed decisions. He also advised them to give him a chance, and he pointed out that his vitals and neuro status had changed. When I joined the family later, they shared their conversations with the nurse and agreed to wait until morning to finalize their decision. Either we will move forward with donation the following day or wait for brain death to occur. The following day, that morning, Corey continued to overbreathe the vent on his exam. He is now flickering his toes when stimulated, and tears were falling from his eyes. The family interpret this as a sign. Despite the grim prognosis shared by the team, the family is now feeling hopeful and in prayer for a miracle. John expressed the plan to give Corey another 24 to 48 hours, and they wanted to give him a fighting chance. He shared stories of his friend who attempted suicide twice. Not only did he survive, but he fully recovered. And he shared that Corey was a fighter, and if his friend, who did everything under the sun, survived, so could his brother. I continue support throughout the day, carefully not bringing up donation or the need to make a decision. Still acknowledging that he wanted to honor Corey's decision to donate, John asked that we draw serology in preparation to withdraw support within the next 2 days, pending he did not progress to brain death. He shared a conversation that he had with Corey, making him a promise that he would not trick or peg him or keep him on machines if it wasn't a meaningful recovery. I decided not to complete the paperwork that day, but assured him that support would always be available to walk him through the process when they were ready. Over the next 3 days, Corey continued to overbreathe the vent, and the family remained hopeful. Soft support was provided, but there was no discussion of donation. On day 5, the family called the unit for updates, still a GCS of 4, overbreathing the vent. John expressed wanting another 24 hours. What I did not know that day, that during that call, the brother spoke to one of the newer providers. He informed them that he did not want to talk to the donation team anymore, and he did not want to donate. The provider told him that he did not have to honor the FPA and would withdraw support whenever he decided to do so. Later that night, shortly after the shift change, John called the unit and stated that he was ready to withdraw the event immediately. After speaking with the hospital and Mora team, I called John to discuss the plan to move forward with donation. It was then that he shared how difficult it had been for the family, and they were restless. They were ready for this to be over. He stated that his parents trusted him to make the right decision and that he made his brother a promise. I reminded him of our discussion to honor Corey's decision to donate. He stated that he changed his mind and wanted his brother to stay whole. I recall the conversation we held Saturday and how he spoke so passionately about their decision to be registered donors and how proud he was of his brother to follow his footsteps. For the next 3 minutes, John let me have it. He threw everything at me that you can imagine as to why his brother was not going to be a donor. He shared that he told his best friend that he was taking it off his license. Misty, John's wife, stated the same. She said she had text messages to prove it. He did not want to be a donor. John said he learned the truth about organ donation and how people paid for organs, and it wasn't fair to the people who did not have money. He shared stories about people who used drugs before and after receiving transplant. He stated that it was their fault that they needed transplant, so why should they help? He stated he did not want his brother cut up and his beating heart snatched out of his body, his exact words. He angrily stated that no one helped his brother, the doctors, AMR, so why should he help someone? He stated that from day one, donation was shoved down his throat and he wanted it over. He also reminded me that the doctors told him that he did not have to donate. I asked him if he can think of all the people, like his friend mother, that did everything right but needed a transplant. I acknowledge and normalize his feelings of anger and judgment. I also acknowledge his feelings of being overwhelmed and feeling guilty. I reminded him that donation was mentioned Saturday only because of their plans to withdraw support. And like him, I wanted to advocate for Corey's heroic decision, the one that he was so proud to share with the family. He went on for several minutes, stating that his mind was made up and as his brother keeper, that he wanted the machines off now and his body to remain whole. He stated his plan to be at the hospital the following morning with his lawyers and would show out, he used more explicit words, I'm sure y'all can imagine, if we move forward with donation. Misty, his wife, joined the conversation again. They both stated that they were very upset with the process and they vowed to change their status and tell everyone to do the same. I ended the call with a plan to call him back later that night. I consulted with the hospital team and my Mora team to develop a plan to continue support and move forward with donation. As promised, I called John back. I explained that I spoke with all teams involved, shared his concerns and his plan to come to the hospital the following morning. I encouraged him to bring his family and his lawyers so we can talk through Corey's decision, his concerns, and the next step. Before ending the call, I reminded him of being his brother keeper and what he said about doing what was the right thing to do. I shared that his prayers for a miracle could still happen by allowing Corey to give someone a second chance. I informed him that the medical team would continue to treat Corey overnight and how desperately I want him to have a chance to be a part of the donation process. The following morning, I, with members of leadership from Mora, huddled with the hospital team, providers, nurses, staff, and the leadership, of course, including legal, to discuss all the details and a plan to move forward with the DCD process. We waited and waited. John finally called. He was not coming to the hospital, but continued to express that he wanted the machines off and did not want to donate. I, along with the hospital team, legal rep, and my Mora team called to talk with John. Before I can finish my greeting, John again interrupted me. He became emotional as he apologized for all the things he stated the night before. He shared that he was angry and took it out on the wrong person. I acknowledged his apology and normalized his feelings. I then shared that I was accompanied by the legal team and still wanted to keep my promise to give him a safe space to ask questions and have all his concerns addressed. He shared that it was not needed and that he trusted me and thanked me actually for treating him like a grieving brother. Within the hour, we completed all the paperwork and entered the OR. Because of Corey's decision, our ability to stay present, and the collaboration of both the hospital and MORA team, 3 lives that day were saved. And since then, I've had a lot of conversations with John back and forth. I did share a text with Anthony from his brother. And I wanted to share it with you because this just speaks volume about persistent and the outcome. He sent me this picture, this text about a week later. And he said that this is actually clouds in the sky that he thought that reminded him of his brother, and he pointed it out. And he was very glad that, his brother saved lives and he was able to push through.
Thank you, Demetria. That's a pretty compelling story, and quite a lot of respectful persistence from you along the way to be able to manage the complexities of a rapidly evolving situation, going from what seemed to be an instant authorization to something much more complicated and interpersonally challenging. But I think, kind of as we spoke earlier, there were some themes that emerged, just your ability to maintain your composure and be stress tolerant, especially when he was giving it to you for 3 minutes straight, everything that he could throw at you. A lot of people would shut down then. A lot of people would take those criticisms or those attacks more personally. And it's something that we probably all need to work on, is just being able to maintain our composure in those really stressful situations, and continue to find ways to try to invoke the interests of, in this case in particular, the donors who have already said that they want to make a decision to save lives. So being able to maintain your composure, being able to be adaptable in those situations, and to ultimately influence John, to honor his brother's wishes is pretty amazing. So thank you both for sharing those experiences, and I know they're quite challenging, and hopefully there were some themes that emerged that the folks on this call can relate to. Maybe they can identify with, having been in similar situations, maybe think differently about how to manage those conversations. And now is the time where you all can ask questions of Heidi and Demetria. So go ahead and and use the Q&A dialog box, and if you've got something that you want to ask, feel free. I'm just generally curious. We'll just kind of go in the same order. So Heidi, what specific advice, like you each had kind of long and detailed case studies, that aren't always going to transcend different situations. Each case is going to be unique in different ways, but there are probably some very specific things that you think of, the skills that you draw upon to facilitate those conversations. What would your advice be? What would be the things that you think people need to pay more attention to in order to get beyond that decline? You're on mute, Heidi.
Sorry, I did that while Demetria was presenting. I think that, you just have to you have to just stay in the presence of the family. You have to be calm. You have to use a good tone of voice. You have to make eye contact with everybody. You need to just stick it out with them. Just keep being the person that's there. Don't go hide on the unit, or, even if we need a break, I go and sit basically right outside the room or close to the room. So they always know where to find me if they have questions. I do a lot of affirming, I understand and I respect your decision. And then try to bring, another point up that kind of counteracts what they're objecting to. I heard years ago from another trainer the term velvet over stone. And that has stuck in my brain for all these years because, we are, right? We're caring and compassionate, we're soft, but right underneath that is this firmness that we also have to stand for. When I was training for this position, I remember always hearing that we're not Switzerland when it comes to donation. And so like our role is to advocate, is to get donors and to advocate for, donation to happen. So, and it's a very complicated and complex way we do that, but to just right underneath that kindness and caring is also this underlying reason of why we're doing this. And I tend to, if a family has a strong opposition, it's almost better to start off a little firm and then have to soften up if you have to. So that you don't want to, you want to stand your ground basically on honoring the patient's wishes.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw that, come out of your case study, and it's this notion again of balance. So, ultimately the goal is donation. And, philosophically, some like OPOs may feel differently about what the role of the FSC is and support versus advocacy for donation, but we believe it's donation. And so, getting past those declines is what's really important. And I think what you're illustrating is doing a good job recognizing the position and the interests of the donor family and addressing those and affirming those and taking what might be an adversarial me versus you conversation and normalizing it and saying, hey, I'm advocating for you too. I understand your interest and your position, but I also advocate and I also recognize the interest of the donor in this case.
Yeah, and in so many cases, they're not mad at us. Like we talked about, one of the main reasons of opposition is out of control. I mean, like my family, they thought somebody didn't do enough to help her. Somebody stole her jewelry. There was this ex-husband coming back into her life at this moment when she's dead, and all this stuff was just happening to them. And it's not really us. It's more like the process and that they have to, that they've been going through all this stuff. And I've even said to families, like, I know I'm not your favorite person right now. Like I acknowledge that they are not happy with me, but it's okay if they're not happy with you. They're not really happy with what's happening. So I try not to take it personally. Usually what happens at the end of all of this, people apologize. And they do say, I'm really sorry that I did that, and of course we never expect an apology, but I do think it's people's emotions that are driving so much of their comments and statements that they make in opposition.
Yeah. We do have a couple questions, but I want to get to Demetria too and get her opinion on this. So, when you think about the specific advice that you might offer, what might be different from, what we've kind of already discussed in terms of, balancing advocacy and being stress tolerant? Are there other things that you recommend for folks who are, maybe challenged to get past those declines?
That's a loaded question. So what I always encourage, and y'all gonna hate me for this, but I always encourage role play. I hate role play, but role play helps you kind of in a safe place, kind of talk through some of those difficult conversations and develop verbiage. And I think you just have to have a sense of confidence and knowing your purpose, knowing the reason why you're there. Like you said, we're there to advocate for the recipients as well as the donor families. And you have to believe in that. You have to believe that you're there to give a gift and that's the gift of donation. And you're not there to take anything back. I think when we sometimes get in the room and we get in the midst of the emotions, we get wrapped up in that as well. I get emotional, I cry. But at some point I have to focus on the goal, and that is to um, honor that person's wishes to help someone. And it's easy to get lost in all of that. So to help someone who's trying to improve their skills, I would say talk with your coworkers, talk through what worked for them. We as a team develop a logbook. And so every week we talk through the reasons, we explored the no's, and we talked through it as a team. We made a log, so when we faced with those, we can kind of refer back to it. I also talk with leadership, understand the direction that your agency is going. I've talked to different OPO, family care specialists, and sometimes our vision may be a little different, but it's always good to know what your leadership, their vision. And we paint visions all the time, so it's good to know the vision that you're being a part of.
So a question came in working with the healthcare team, how do you use, these interpersonal approaches to work through the staff saying that the family did not have to follow the FPA? How do you manage that within the team itself?
Heidi, you want to take this one?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
A lot of huddles. I think in my 2 years, I've gained a lot of great relationships with our hospital team. I can imagine the feeling that I had this day, because I had people that I've been working with for 10 years say, "How dare you?" The family do not have to honor that, and they even question taking it off their license. Address the feelings, address the concerns, name it, and a lot of conversations to explain to them why we're so passionate about what we do and why we're standing our ground and talking about FPA and wanting to honor that. And I think for me, my members of my leadership team was there with me. They gave me a little courage to say, "Hey, we need to have these conversations." You're not going to get it the first go round. They're not going to always understand. You have to think about, we're only about 2 to 5% of what they do. Their job is to take care of families. Take care of the patients. And we're coming in now saying we want to save lives a different way. And they don't always understand that. So communication, staff awareness, huddle with the team. I can't say it enough. Talk and talk. They probably get tired of me talking. Talk and talk and check in, and I check in with them just to see how they're doing. They don't always agree, but this is our job.
Yeah. Heidi, do you have a position on, interpersonally how you manage the healthcare team in this situation?
Yeah, it's a lot of what Demetrius said. We were actually just talking about this not too long ago, and we also talk about all these things and all the words, the difference in the tiny little words that we use and how that influences everything. But we were just talking that the medical teams think nothing of having to tell a family that your loved one has to go to the medical examiner. Nobody gets to object to that. And so, families can be upset and they can call, but we usually know what the outcome of that is. So it's just interesting. It's almost kind of like getting a mindset shift, with the team that these are things that other people, it's their job to make these things happen. And I think if it's just education and a lot of follow-up too. And to go back the next time you're at that hospital, if you see the person, go and address it with them and say, "It's been a while, what are your thoughts now?" I just try to always just face whatever the issue is instead of not talking about it.
Thank you. Robin had a question. She said, "Thank you for sharing to both of you." Did both of your hospitals support FPA? Were you aware that they supported it, and how did that help with how firm you were in your conversations? Heidi, you want to start?
Yeah, so this particular hospital that I was at, they work with us very well. The actual set of ICU docs is really pretty supporting towards donation. So that was definitely in my favor. Um, so in this particular case, I I felt like they were going to support. And when the doctor came to me and told me that, hey, they came up to me and told me they don't want donation to happen and asked me, what could I do about it? He told me that he had told them that this is a separate thing between you and the donation team, and we don't have anything to do with it. So he really kind of helped and diffuse that, opportunity pretty quickly for the family. So it was advantageous to me in this case.
Demetria?
So to answer your question, yes, the support of the hospital did play a very big role in my ability, in my comfort and confident in ability to deliver the message to the family, like we're going to move forward. What helped it also in leading up to that is our HD team and leadership meeting with hospital personnel and saying, this is the direction we're going. This is our vision. And doing that prep work before I got to this point. And I'm thankful for that, because I can remember times 5, 6, 7 years ago that those we probably would have walked away. And so I knew we were going to move forward. And DCD is scary because you don't know, like Heidi, you don't know what the outcome could be. But regardless, we were going to move forward. And so I wanted to make sure that I convey that to the family. And I don't think I would have been able to do that with so much confidence if I didn't have the support from leadership of both Mora and the hospital.
Demetria, you had also shared with me another resource, the Timely Family Interactions. Do you want to spend a few minutes talking about that? You're on mute.
Thank you. We are right by our airport, so I try to meet the line. So as Heidi pointed out earlier, timing sometimes can be a big obstacle for us. It's never, I'm sure we all experience when we get that call, the family's at the bedside and they're ready to withdraw support. So to address some of those challenges, we started focusing on family ready triggers. And so we just educate the staff. You are our eyes, you are our ears, and knowing what's going on with the family, and recognize some of these family cues as you see when the family. And so it's not always when they make the decision to withdraw support, because we know it's pretty too late. It's almost too late at that point to hit the brakes. But understanding when the family is asking about what's next, or they're calling family members from out of state, don't necessarily say we're ready to make the decision, but when they're gathering information to make those decisions, we want to start support, engage their understanding. And sometimes it's just reading in between the lines when they say things like, he wouldn't want to live like this. And, I need to call my auntie. She needs to be here. Those are cues for us to kind of step in and start engaging, not necessarily approach for donation, but at least start to engage, huddle with staff to let them know we're on board and how we want to develop a plan. And so we have found that it helps with those rush to the hospital to ask the family to wait. Because a lot of times when we're that far, when they're at the bedside and they're ready, that the wait time is almost impossible.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I've got one other question that maybe we can just get to real quickly. And you've shared recently, Demetria, I appreciate it. So Heidi, I'll throw this one to you. I'm just generally curious, when you have a family that's declined, and in this case with an FPA, And we talk about advocating on behalf of other stakeholders. Obviously, you're going to have to address the interests of the donor family in order to get anywhere. But when it comes to, talking about the benefit to recipients, whether it's ending suffering, improving the quality of their life, saving their life, or the wishes of the donor themselves, like, do you find that one or the other tends to be more persuasive or inspirational in moving that decision?
I think that's a tough one because like all of our cases are so like individualized. So I can't say I have a feeling for that exactly. I think advocating for the recipients, it's somewhere in our conversation, we end up mentioning them. I think to advocate for them and say a few things is helpful. I know, like, too, we'll always make sure that families know they can help directed donation if they know somebody who is on the waiting list, or perhaps you've known somebody who's had a transplant. We try to personalize it so they go, oh yeah, that neighbor down the street, I remember they had a liver transplant or something like that. So yes, it's good. And I think it's also detrimental to be like, oh, but they could save like 5 people, because then that doesn't personalize it for them. So, and then for some families, it's focusing more about the patient and their character. And, even though you didn't know this, like, think about their character and, most of them will say, yeah, somebody usually will say, yeah, he was giving, like, this doesn't surprise me, or he'd do anything for people. We know that. So I think you have to just kind of use a balance of what the opposition is, and then kind of what's your gut feeling towards which way to go.
Yeah. Well, a lot of like what you've learned about the donor as part of those conversations, or the family in general, that you may be able to go back to at some point in future conversations. Well, we've reached top of the hour, and I really do appreciate the time that you have both shared, and the time and information you both shared with everybody today. I know that they appreciate it. So thank you on behalf of everyone. I think there's been some requests for contact information coming in, so we'll manage that, of course. Just a reminder to those of you on the call that we will be sending out, again, a really brief survey about today's session. And again, one of the most important things there is, what do you want to talk about? What do you want us to put on the schedule for a session in the future? So share your interests so that we can respond to them. And this is the way that, I think as a community, we'll all learn from one another. So again, thank you for your time, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.